Britain is labouring under the crushing weight of taxation because the host population, who are more productive than newcomers, have to battery farm indolent foreign nationals at their expense. And Neil O'Brien MP has done some extensive work recently that has found that more than 1 million foreigners are claiming benefits. That's 7.5 billion in universal credit paid to foreign nationals in just 1 year. This is analysis by the Centre for Migration Control as well, suggesting that 40 nationalities, after getting indefinite leave to remain, are claiming benefits at a higher rate than those of British citizens. That's 3 nationalities: Congolese, Iraqis, and Afghans are claiming benefits at rates 4 times that of the British people. Of 200 nationalities, Polish accounted for the largest number of claimants at 89,040, followed by Pakistani, of course, 85,881, Bangladeshi, 54,589, Romanian, 45,727, Indian, 33,561, Portuguese, 32,063, Nigerian, 23,627, and Irish, 17,933. Right. All of those nationalities, Irish aside, are not indigenous to the British Isles, and so should not be here. I should not be paying exorbitant amounts of tax. We should not be paying as a collective billions in tax every year to subsidise the stay of unproductive foreign nationals. And bear in mind, there are Pakistanis and Bangladeshis in this country, a third of which have never worked in their lives. Why are you here? I mean, I am fine with and understand why women would not want to work staying at home, raising their children, if they are raising them to be constituents of my culture, of my country, as my countrymen. But these ethno-sectarian satellite communities are not doing that, and so I do not want to pay for them to have more children and raise their families in a culture wholly apart from and hostile to my own. So I should not be paying to battery farm the indolent of the third world. Department from Work and Pension spokesperson, though, commenting to the Telegraph, said that we have a duty to pay benefits to all those entitled to receive them. And this is the mentality of the Treasury and the government, right? They have a universal constituency. They believe that all human beings are blank slates, and so if you just give them enough money at the taxpayer's expense, they will be transmogrified into someone as British as you and me. This is the opinion of Gus O'Donnell, who spoke to David Goodhart at a dinner in Oxford. I think it was in 2010. Gus O'Donnell was the cabinet secretary under Blair and Brown, and David Goodhart had said that he was writing a book on the anywhere and somewhere distinction, the people who feel more at home in an airport lounge than in their own country, versus the somewheres, the sort of people of the shires of Hobbiton in The Lord of the Rings, who feel very locked and loyal to places like Britain. And Gus O'Donnell said, when I was at the Treasury, I advocated for the most liberalised immigration system possible because I believed that my obligations were to improving global welfare. So they see, much like that heat map from the Jonathan Haidt experiment, their locus of moral concern to being universal humanity in general, rather than their family, their community, their congregation, their countrymen. And so this is an intractable mindset that at the moment infests not just the major parties, but all the halls of Whitehall who hold the levers of power and are actually running the country rather than politicians. And so this leads me on to this article by The Spectator. And this is recent. This is exploring the meme of Nick 30’s. I think it was originally coined by a French meme account, but there is, of course, a British version of the social contract. So Nick is your average working professional. He probably has a house of multiple occupancy, renting arrangement to live in one of the scarce economic opportunity zones, mainly London, where the centralised opportunities for young professionals are, and his high levels of taxes, the highest burden since 1948 in the post-war period, are being siphoned off to welfare programs, foreign aid going to the third world, to the job centre that then goes to Karim, usually a second-generation British-born but equally indolent as his parents immigrant, who wears a balaclava and occasionally steals people's phones, and like Gwayne Towler, who got his phone nicked recently and had £6,000 spent on remittances via Western Union to the same area of the third world. And then it also goes to the Department of Work and Pensions and goes to Simon and Linda, who are boomers who benefit disproportionately via the NHS from having bought their homes at significantly lower prices than the escalating housing markets are now. In 1997, before something happened and immigration skyrocketed, houses were 2 to 3 times your average income. Now they're 10 to 11 times, and even worse depending on the area that you want to live in, especially in the southeast of England or London, where I am. It goes to them to build up their property portfolio. It goes to them who benefit from the subsidized healthcare system that was put in place when there were far more people of working age than there were pensioners. And now there is an inverse demographic pyramid of a fewer number of working age and working people. 25% of working age people, by the way, are on some kind of out of work benefit. So that's increased rapidly since COVID. But a fewer number of working and productive people are paying the taxes to support the healthcare system, the pension system, which then Simon and Linda spend on lucrative cruises. And the article by The Spectator explains that with his austerity-phobic backbenchers spooked by the local elections, Keir Starmer wants to restore eligibility for the winter fuel allowance for most pensioners and remove the two-child benefit limit. On the hunt for disillusioned Labour voters, Nigel Farage has gone further, aiming to scrap the cap and restore the allowance in full, at an estimated cost of £5 billion. This on top of the £80 billion that the Institute for Fiscal Studies suggests his plan to raise the threshold for paying income tax to £20,000 could require. Now, I think that's a good plan, but there are suggestions that without even more substantial cuts to benefits, just tinker at the margins by cutting wasteful, woke diversity, equity, and inclusion programs and anti-right racism requirements, the yoke of compliance with IR35 rules, the sabotage of our energy sector by net zero, and the costliness of mass immigration, they have said that still there might be economic problems that just arise from our demographic realities and the fact that we have unfundable but committed welfare spending arrangements for the NHS and pensions. And they're just not going to be met. And so the Centre for Policy Studies have done a great thread on how Nick is suffering. So I'm just going to go through this here because I think we are, much like the narrator from Fight Club, all suffering from the same level of economic dispossession and feeling that we have no natural political party for whom our concerns are being heard. I think that we're all feeling much like Nick at the moment. We are Nick's complete lack of hope and his crippling sense of despair. So, CPS says Nick's trapped in a cruel paradox. He pays over half his take-home pay to live in a cramped house of multiple occupancy, more than most mortgage payments, but banks won't lend to him because he usually can't meet the cost of the deposit, even though he could actually pay for the monthly mortgage. Post-2008 rules mean to prevent crashes now prevent home buying. So the government engineered the crash by reckless spending and, in America, anti-racist loan guarantees. So they were giving out loans to people that can never pay them back because of disparities along racial lines in home ownership. And now your average working professional who abides by the law and pays his taxes is punished by being a permanent rent serf. His landlord bought with credit that Nick can never access. On top of this, Nick faces impossible competition for housing. England built 908,000 new homes in 4 years to March 2024. Most of them are really ugly, by the way. They're usually sort of like Dino Barrett new build boxes that are unfit for human habitation, usually with astroturf grass, and much smaller bedrooms than were built in 1930s build. And this is a large part due to the 1947 Countryside and Planning Act as well, which makes it all but impossible for anyone except the government building social housing to build anything. Net migration created demand for 925,000 homes over the same period. Nick didn't vote for this policy, but he pays the price in soaring rents and house prices. Nick pays into a welfare system designed for a different era. In 1972, each pensioner was supported by 4.5 workers. By 2022, it was 3.3 workers per pensioner. By 2072, just 1.9 workers will support each pensioner. Nick will be carrying twice the load that his parents did. And this is why the party's code as either providing benefits to immigrants or providing benefits to pensioners. This is why the Conservative Party at the last election, one, they called the election early because they calculated that 0.5% of their voter base would have died off if they waited for another 6 months. Not joking, by the way. But also, they insisted on national service, on quadruple locking the pensions, on funding the NHS more, because they knew that it was only old boomers that had vested interests in the welfare state who would vote for them. Whereas Labour doubled down on identity grievance politics on behalf of imported tribalistic minorities who they could basically pay to be a permanent client group once they were given indefinite leave to remain, or because if you're from a Commonwealth country like Nigeria, India, or Pakistan, thanks to the 1948 Nationality Act, you can vote in our elections anyway. That's an insane proposition that needs to be repealed instantly. Public spending on over 65 will rise from around 10.1% of GDP today to 21.3% by 2072. So it doubles. It's already unsustainable, and it's going to double. That's a 285 billion annual increase in today's money. Nick's generation will fund the most expensive elderly care system in history for people richer than them. And that's obviously reliant on the idea that inflation isn't going to rampantly increase through government mismanagement of the economy between now and then. Nick probably went to university and got saddled with £45,600 worth of debt, plus that if he did a master's. 20% of graduates would have been better off never even going, thanks Tony Blair. He was promised success and delivered even more financial burden, and just 27% of students repay their loan in full. And of course, when he was there as well, he would have had to live in terrible accommodation or pay for exorbitantly expensive new accommodation, because most of the new accommodation is filled by rich international students, often the sons and daughters of members of the Chinese Communist Party, who for some reason we're training in expertise of Western education, despite them being our enemies, who pay a lot more in fees, and so the universities and the student accommodation suppliers get hooked on the drug of foreign money, and so price domestic students out of the market. Want kids, Nick? The average nursery place costs £14,000 a year, just £1,200 less than private school fees. Britain has the highest childcare costs in the OECD. The system crushes families with costs, then faces the consequences of falling birth rates. Well, okay, I would like to disagree with the CPS here. It's not that childcare increases birth rates, because the Scandinavian countries have run this experiment. And it's also really bad for children. See Erica Commissar or Katie Faust's work on the blood cortisol level effect on children that daycare has, for example. No, the thing that will encourage, actually, people to have more children is if they can spend time at home with said children, because who wants to have a child to then ferry themselves back into the workforce and pass off your child to be cared for by some low-wage, often immigrant worker who's also got to attend to the needs of 30 other children, so can't actually do their job properly. Terrible idea. Instead, we should be returning to the prospect of single-earner households, or at least part-time flexible work for mothers. But none of the major parties are interested in this. And recently, when talking about the two-child benefit cap, Reform UK's brand new MP Sarah Pochin said that this is going to encourage mothers back to work. That's not what we want. We want mothers at home, caring for the children that they themselves say they want, transmitting the values that they themselves say they believe in to sustain our civilization. That's way more important than trying to squeeze the last few drops of GDP like blood out of a stone from already pressured young professionals. And then they finish with, Nick's voice gets drowned out every election. Turnout among voters under 35 tends to be around 40 to 50%, versus 70 to 80% for those aged 55 and older. Democracy becomes gerontocracy when the young don't vote. Well, the young don't vote because they aren't being given anything to incentivize them to come to the polls. And Reform can tout their growing youth support all they like, but that's because they're basically a protest vote against the Uniparty, which has punished them in the vice between boomer patronage schemes and immigrant subsidies. If, as Rupert Lowe has suggested, the boomer generation extends an olive branch, makes an offer that's enticing to the Zoomer generation, well, they might win them over as an excitable, digitally literate voting bloc with a revolutionary appetite. And I think that's a very sensible idea. Whether or not they'll be taken up on that offer remains to be seen.